A great businessman, a disappointed father. It was nearing midnight, but the top floor of Reynolds Tower, the headquarters of Reynolds Corp., was still brightly lit. Alexander Reynolds, one of the most powerful businessmen in America, sat at his desk, surrounded by stacks of documents and flickering financial charts on multiple screens. His piercing blue eyes scanned the numbers carefully. Markets were shifting, mergers were happening, and the financial world never slept. But despite all of this, his biggest concern had nothing to do with business. It was his only son, Ethan Reynolds. Ethan should have been here, learning how to manage the company, preparing to take over one day. But where was he? Partying, recklessly spending money, driving luxury cars through the most expensive streets of New York, laughing with so-called friends who only cared about his wealth. Alexander let out a long sigh. He had built an empire from nothing, yet his own son didn't understand the value of hard work. "Are you all right, sir?" James Carter, his longtime assistant, entered the room with a fresh cup of coffee. "No, James, I'm not." Alexander leaned back in his chair, his voice heavy. "I've spent 40 years building this empire, but my son doesn't appreciate any of it. He thinks money will always be there no matter what. He's still young, sir. Maybe he just needs time." "No." Alexander shook his head. "I've given him time. Too much time. If I don't do something now, it'll be too late." James studied his boss's face. He had worked for Alexander for decades, and he could tell when the man had made up his mind. And this time it looked like something drastic was about to happen. A Ferrari SF90 roared through the streets of Manhattan, its engine growling like a beast. Ethan Reynolds gripped the steering wheel, grinning as the city lights blurred past. Beside him sat Leo, his closest friend and partner in crime when it came to wild parties and extravagant spending. "Damn, man, you really know how to live," Leo laughed. "Nobody does it better than you." Ethan smirked, pressing the accelerator. Of course, money is never a problem. They arrived at an exclusive nightclub, the kind of place where only the wealthiest could get in. The music was deafening, the drinks endless, and the women beautiful. Ethan didn't even glance at the price list before ordering the most expensive bottles. "Hey, Ethan, what are you going to do when your dad finally makes you work?" A girl next to him giggled. Ethan chuckled, shaking his head. "My dad? Don't worry about that. He needs me to take over the company, and I'm not ready yet. When I want to, everything will still be there waiting for me." His friends laughed, toasting their glasses. Ethan sipped his drink, feeling invincible. He had no idea that at that very moment, a plan was already in motion that would change his life forever. 2 days later, inside a private meeting room at Reynolds Corp., Alexander sat across from James Carter and Raymond Black, the family lawyer. "We need to make Ethan believe that everything is gone," Alexander said firmly. Raymond frowned. "What do you mean?" "I want everything taken away. His money, his cars, his mansion, his credit cards, everything." "You want to freeze his accounts?" "Not just that, I want him to think I've lost everything." James took a deep breath. "You're planning to fake bankruptcy?" Alexander nodded. "I've thought this through. Ethan doesn't understand the value of money. He believes he will always have wealth, status, in the safety net of our family. If I don't teach him this lesson now, he will never learn to stand on his own." Raymond hesitated. "Are you sure? This could be brutal." Alexander stared at him with unwavering determination. "Sometimes the only way to save someone is to let them fall first." The room fell silent. James nodded. "So what's the plan?" Alexander took a sip of his coffee, his mind already set. "Step 1, announce that Reynolds Corp is bankrupt. I will fake an arrest for financial fraud. Every asset tied to me and Ethan will be frozen. Step 2, cut off all of Ethan's financial resources. No credit cards, no allowances, nothing. Step 3, take away everything, his cars, his mansion, even his designer clothes." James slowly nodded. "He'll have nothing left." "Exactly." Alexander allowed himself a small smile. "And then we'll see what he does when he has nothing." That night, while Ethan was still enjoying his luxurious lifestyle, unaware of the storm ahead, the first phase of Alexander's plan was already underway. At a high-security facility, Alexander Reynolds sat down in a staged prison cell, preparing for the biggest act of his life. "All right, son," he thought, "let's see what you do when you have nothing left." And with that, Ethan Reynolds' nightmare officially began. Early in the morning, the New York sky was overcast with heavy gray clouds, signaling an ominous day ahead. On Wall Street, where financial transactions operated like a machine that never stopped, an unexpected announcement sent shockwaves through the entire market. "Reynolds Corporation declares bankruptcy. CEO Alexander Reynolds arrested for financial fraud." The news exploded like a bomb. Television networks immediately broadcast emergency segments. Financial reporters sat in their studios, their faces grave as they delivered the breaking news. According to our latest information, Reynolds Corp officially filed for bankruptcy this morning. Federal authorities have arrested CEO Alexander Reynolds for investigation into large-scale financial fraud. This company was once one of the most powerful in America. What exactly happened? Outside the Reynolds Corp headquarters, hundreds of employees stood in shock as they were escorted out of the building. Some broke down in tears, realizing they had lost their jobs overnight. At the New York Stock Exchange, Reynolds Corp's stock price plummeted at an unprecedented rate, triggering a massive sell-off. Traders shouted frantically as the system recorded one of the worst declines of the year. While Wall Street was in turmoil, Ethan Reynolds was still sleeping soundly in his luxurious mansion. Soft light filtered through the curtains, marking the start of another normal day. He stretched lazily, reaching for his phone on the nightstand. His notifications were flooded with missed calls and messages from unknown numbers. He ignored them, scrolling through briefly before tossing the phone aside. Dressed in expensive designer clothes, Ethan made his way downstairs, casually pouring himself a cup of coffee that had been prepared by the house staff. Everything was just as it should be, until his eyes accidentally landed on the large TV screen mounted on the wall. Reynolds Corporation declares bankruptcy. CEO Alexander Reynolds arrested for financial fraud. Ethan nearly dropped his coffee cup. "What the hell is going on?" he muttered, his heart pounding. He couldn't believe what he was seeing. The TV broadcast showed Alexander Reynolds being led away by federal agents, surrounded by a mob of reporters, cameras flashing nonstop. His father's expression was cold and unreadable. Journalists shouted questions, shoving microphones toward him. "Mr. Reynolds, do you have anything to say about this scandal? Is this the end of your empire? Are you guilty of the allegations?" Ethan felt the entire room spinning. No way, this had to be fake news. He immediately grabbed his phone and dialed his father's number. The call went straight to voicemail. He tried again. Nothing. Ethan started to panic. He quickly switched to calling James Carter, his father's most trusted assistant. "James, I need to talk to my dad right now. What the hell is going on?" James's voice on the other end sounded tense. "Ethan, I can't say much over the phone, but Mr. Reynolds, he was taken in this morning." Ethan froze. "What? Are you kidding me? This is impossible." "No, Ethan. There's no mistake. The FBI raided Reynolds Corp earlier today. Your father was arrested in his office. Ethan, you need to prepare yourself." A chill ran down Ethan's spine. "Prepare myself? What are you talking about?" James hesitated for a moment before continuing. "All of your family's assets have been frozen, including your bank accounts." Ethan felt like the ground had disappeared beneath his feet. No way." James's voice dropped to a regretful tone. "I'm sorry, Ethan, but you don't have anything left." Right then, the call disconnected. Ethan stared at his phone in shock, his heartbeat racing. This couldn't be real. He bolted toward the garage. But when he opened the door, he felt like he had been punched in the gut. Every single luxury car was gone. No Ferrari, no Lamborghini, no Rolls-Royce. The garage was empty. Ethan rushed back into the house, calling out for the staff. Silence. He ran upstairs, searching for the security team. No one was there. His once grand mansion was eerily quiet and empty. Ethan stood frozen, a horrifying realization settling in. This wasn't a nightmare. Everything was gone. Ethan ran out of the mansion and headed straight for the nearest bank branch. His body was drenched in sweat, even though the morning air was cold. The only thought running through his mind was, "This has to be a mistake. I still have money." Bursting through the glass doors, he rushed to the teller. "I need to withdraw money, all of it." The bank teller looked up at him, her expression neutral but slightly sympathetic. "I'm sorry, sir, but your account has been frozen due to an ongoing investigation." The words hit him like a punch to the gut. Ethan let out a small, nervous laugh, thinking there must be some misunderstanding. "No, you don't understand. I'm Ethan Reynolds. I need my money now." The teller remained calm but firm. "I'm sorry, Mr. Reynolds, but we are unable to process any transactions related to your account." "What about my credit cards?" "All credit cards linked to Reynolds Corp have also been deactivated. We cannot authorize any withdrawals." Ethan's legs suddenly felt weak. "Can I speak to the branch man?" "I'm sorry, sir, but there is nothing we can do." People around him started to glance over, sensing the tension. Ethan stepped back, his heart pounding. This couldn't be happening. For the first time in his life, Ethan truly had nothing. With no other choice, Ethan pulled out his phone and called the people he had once considered his closest friends. Call to Leo. Bro, I need to borrow some money. I'm in trouble. Ethan? Yeah, I don't think I can help you right now. You understand, right? No, wait. I just need a little. I'll pay you back tomorrow. Sorry, bro, I'm busy. Talk later. The call ended. Call to Jake. Dude, I just saw the news. Ethan, what happened? Doesn't matter. I need cash right now. I think you should find someone else for that. Are you serious? Yeah, sorry, man. Another call ended. Call to Ashley. Ethan, are you okay? No, I need a place to stay, just for a few days. Uh, Ethan, I don't think that's a good idea. I really can't help you. Are you kidding me? You were at my party last week. I'm sorry, Ethan. Another call disconnected. Ethan stared at his phone. He called Leo again, but no answer. He called others, but no one picked up. It was at that moment that Ethan realized he hadn't lost friends. He had never had them in the first place. They were only there when he had money. Ethan stepped out of the bank, standing on the busy sidewalk of New York City. For the first time in his life, he had no idea where to go. No car, no home, no money, no one to help. The world around him kept moving. Businessmen in tailored suits hurried past. Women carrying designer handbags walked briskly. Taxis sped down the avenues. Life continued as usual. Only Ethan had been left behind. His stomach growled. A sharp, painful hunger gnawed at him, but he had no money to buy food. Across the street, he saw an upscale cafe, the kind of place where he used to walk in without ever checking the prices. He stepped inside, momentarily escaping the cold air outside. A young barista behind the counter greeted him with a polite smile. Good afternoon, sir. What can I get for you? Ethan reached into his pockets, a sinking feeling creeping over him. He had nothing. Can I use the Wi-Fi for a bit? The girl raised an eyebrow slightly, then gave him a questioning look. Are you planning to order something? I don't have any money. She hesitated for a moment before shrugging. Sorry, but we don't offer free Wi-Fi unless you make a purchase. Ethan felt heat rise to his face. Never in his life had he been turned away because he couldn't pay. He turned around and walked out without another word, feeling as if the world had just slapped him across the face. Night was falling, and the streetlights flickered on. Ethan wandered aimlessly through the streets where he had once sped past in his sports cars, now feeling the cold seep through his designer jacket. He walked through a darker part of the city where homeless people huddled under the awnings of abandoned buildings. A middle-aged man rummaged through a trash bin, looking for scraps of food. An elderly woman clutched a tattered blanket, trying to stay warm. Ethan stopped, looking at them, then looking at himself. Yesterday he had everything. Today he was no different from the people sleeping on the sidewalks. The realization hit him like a punch to the gut. For the first time in his life, Ethan truly understood what it meant to have nothing. He sat down on the steps of a building, burying his face in his hands, completely lost. For the first time, he felt real fear. But the worst part was, this was only the beginning. Ethan dragged his feet along the sidewalk, his legs numb from walking too much. His stomach twisted in hunger, his vision blurred. Ahead of him was a small pawn shop, its flickering neon sign barely illuminating the dusty glass door. He looked down at the Rolex watch on his wrist, a birthday gift from his father. Next to it was his iPhone, once a gateway to the lavish world he had taken for granted. There's no other choice. He stepped inside. The shop was stifling, cluttered with old items stacked haphazardly, watches, jewelry, even battered laptops. Behind the counter stood a middle-aged man with sharp, calculating eyes, the type who preyed on desperate people. What do you want? The man asked gruffly. Ethan placed his watch and phone on the counter. I want to sell these. The man picked up the Rolex, turning it over in his hands, then let out a smirk. Nice piece, but you don't look like someone who belongs here. Ethan gritted his teeth but held his tongue. He had no other options. How much? The man tapped a few numbers into an old calculator. 300 for the watch. 200 for the phone. Ethan froze. What? This watch is worth at least 15 grand, and my phone is practically new. The man shrugged, his voice flat and emotionless. You can take it or leave it. Everyone knows pawn shops lowball. Your choice. Ethan clenched his fists, but deep down, he knew the man was right. With his heart pounding and sweat trickling down his back, Ethan nodded stiffly. Fine. The man sneered, dropping a crumpled stack of bills on the counter before shoving the items aside. Ethan picked up the money, but inside he felt empty and utterly foolish. He knew he had been scammed, But what could he do? For the first time in his life, Ethan truly understood what it meant to be taken advantage of. Without another word, he turned and walked out the door, gripping the pathetic sum of $500 as if it were his last lifeline. Outside, the city moved on as if no one cared about his downfall. Ethan slumped onto the sidewalk outside the pawn shop, staring at the money in his hands. I used to spend this much in seconds. Now it's all I have left. No more phone, no more watch, no more remnants of his once privileged life. All that remained was Ethan Reynolds, broke and humiliated. His stomach growled again, reminding him he had to survive. Ethan stood up, stuffing the money into his pocket. All right, I have $500, I'll make it last. But he didn't know that it wouldn't last long. And he didn't know that life was about to hit him even harder. With what little money he had, Ethan found a cheap roadside motel. The receptionist, a sleazy-looking man, eyed him suspiciously, but still took his cash and handed him a key. The tiny, musty room smelled of damp wood and neglect, but it was the only shelter he had left. That night, Ethan spent a portion of his money on a stale sandwich and a bottle of water. It was his first proper meal in days. But just 2 days later, his money was gone, and he was kicked out. "You can't stay here for free, kid. No money? Get lost." The motel owner grabbed Ethan by the collar, shoving him out the door and tossing his few belongings onto the pavement. Ethan stood there, watching the door slam shut. He had nowhere left to go. His stomach growled again. Wandering the streets, stomach empty, Ethan felt a fear he had never known before. Food had always been an afterthought. Now it was an impossible luxury. The warm smell of fresh bread from a small grocery store made his hunger even worse. His eyes fixated on the food, his hands curled into fists. "Just a little, I can't starve." He looked around, no one was watching. Ethan slipped inside, walking toward the food aisle. He grabbed a sandwich and a bottle of water, stuffing them into his jacket. Just as he turned to leave, a rough hand clamped down on his shoulder. "You think you can steal from me, kid?" The store owner, a large, intimidating man, dragged Ethan toward the front. I was just hungry." Smack! A punch landed straight in Ethan's stomach, making him collapse onto the floor. The pain shot through his entire body, knocking the air out of his lungs. "You think being hungry is an excuse?" the man growled, before kicking Ethan in the ribs. Ethan let out a choked gasp, curling into himself. "This is what thieves get." The man grabbed Ethan by the collar and threw him out onto the sidewalk. Ethan hit the pavement hard, blood trickling from his mouth. Lying there, bruised and beaten, a single thought echoed in his mind. "Why did my father do this to me?" Ethan clenched his teeth, his vision blurred with anger. He hated his father, but he didn't know that, from a distance, someone was watching him. A man pulled out his phone and made a call. "He's hit rock bottom." Ethan didn't know when he had fallen asleep on the pavement. When he opened his eyes, it was dark, and rain had begun to fall. Cold raindrops splashed against his bruised face, waking him with a shiver. He sat up, hugging himself for warmth beneath the shelter of a bus stop, trying to escape the freezing air. For the first time, he felt completely and utterly lost. And then, for the first time, Ethan asked himself, "How did I get here?" At first, he blamed his father. "You put me in this situation." But then another voice inside him spoke. Or was it my own fault? For the first time, Ethan truly looked at his past. He had everything, but he had never appreciated it. And now he had only one choice left. He needed to find a job. Not for pride, not for status, just to survive. Ethan took a deep breath, then stood up. For the first time, he decided to do something for himself. After days of wandering the streets, Ethan finally understood one thing. If he didn't want to starve, he had to find a job. But the problem was he had nothing. No degree, no skills, no experience. In the past, Ethan believed money would always be there, that as long as he lived, everything would come to him. But now, standing in front of doors that refused to open for him, being rejected over and over again, he finally understood how the world truly worked. No one cared about his past wealth. No one cared that he was once the son of a billionaire. All they saw was a broke, homeless man with no value. And that was why he accepted his first job, cleaning toilets. Ethan stepped into a small, run-down restaurant with a faded sign hanging above the entrance. The restaurant owner, a middle-aged man with a stern face, looked Ethan up and down. "Do you have any work experience?" Ethan shook his head. "I'll do anything." The man thought for a moment, then nodded. "Good, the bathroom needs cleaning. Go take care of it." Ethan froze. He once had everything, once spent thousands of dollars on luxury vacations without a second thought. And now he had to kneel down and scrub toilets. For the first time, Ethan truly understood what humiliation felt like. Customers looked down on him. "Get away from me, you look filthy," coworkers mocked him. Look at this guy. He can't even mop a floor properly. The boss yelled at him. Ethan, what the hell are you doing? Clean it again. Ethan endured everything. But no matter how hard he tried, he just wasn't good at it. 2 days later, Ethan was fired. You're not fit for this job. He wanted to scream, to argue, to say he could try harder. But he knew it was the truth. With no other options, he returned to the streets once more. That night, as he wandered aimlessly, Ethan bumped into someone. Hey, watch where you're going. He stumbled back, realizing he had walked into a girl carrying a large bag of food deliveries. She had long black hair, a beautiful face, but there was a toughness in her eyes, a kind of resilience he hadn't seen before. She wore a delivery uniform, and instead of looking at Ethan with disgust, she studied him with curiosity. Sorry, I didn't mean to, Ethan muttered. The girl observed him for a long moment, then suddenly asked, You don't have a place to stay, do you? Ethan didn't know how to respond. She was silent for a moment, then sighed. I'm Sophie. I work as a food delivery driver. If you need a job, I can help you. Ethan was too shocked to speak. You're serious? I don't help people for free. Sophie shrugged. If you know your way around this city, you can work. If not, don't waste my time. Ethan couldn't believe this opportunity. I know the streets. I'll do it. Sophie nodded. Then follow me. And just like that, Ethan got his second job, food delivery. For the first time in weeks, Ethan had a stable job. The work was simple. Pick up the order, take it to the address, get paid. And thanks to knowing every street in New York, he did well. Ethan was no longer looked down upon. No one cared who he was, as long as he did his job right. Things were finally starting to feel stable. Until one day, Ethan received a delivery order that changed everything. When Ethan looked at the address on the receipt, his heart clenched. It was a luxury mansion, a place he used to visit when he was rich. Inside, his former friends were waiting. Ethan took a deep breath, stepping toward the door. Someone opened it, taking the food from his hands. And then laughter erupted. Wait a second, am I seeing this right? Ethan froze. A group of people stepped out from inside, his old friends. Holy shit, Ethan Reynolds is delivering food? Can you believe this? The guy who used to throw money at people is now holding a plastic bag for us. Laughter echoed around him. Ethan gritted his teeth, trying to contain the humiliation burning inside him. He wanted to scream, to throw the bag to the ground, to punch every single one of them. But he couldn't. He needed this job. One of them pulled out his wallet, holding up a $20 bill. Hey, Ethan, you want some money? Get on your knees and beg for it. Ethan tightened his jaw, his fists trembling. He didn't say a word. He didn't fight back. He just reached out, took the money, and turned away, leaving behind the sound of mocking laughter, leaving behind the world that was once his. And as he walked out through the mansion gates, Ethan realized one thing. He had truly lost everything. In the following days, Ethan began to truly understand things he had never thought about before. Money had never been an issue for him before. He spent it without a second thought, willing to drop thousands of dollars on a designer jacket or an expensive meal. But now, as he had to earn his own money, he finally realized its real value. Every delivery meant another drop of sweat. Every dollar earned was a piece of his effort. Some days he rode his bike under the scorching sun, sweat soaking his shirt. Other nights he braved the rain, shivering as he delivered food just to earn a few extra dollars. For the first time, for the first time, Ethan understood that money wasn't something that simply existed. It had to be earned. And because of that, he no longer wasted it. When he received his first paycheck, he didn't rush to spend it. Instead, he carefully calculated how to make it last. Even though it wasn't much, it felt more valuable than any amount of money he had ever held before. The apartment Ethan rented was nothing more than a small, rundown room with a stiff single bed, an old fan, and a tiny window overlooking a cramped alleyway. Before, he had lived in a luxurious mansion, complete with a private pool and a team of servants catering to his every need. Now he only had this tiny space to sleep in. At first, Ethan felt miserable. How am I supposed to live in a place like this? He muttered the first time he stepped inside. But over time, he started to adapt. He learned to wash his own clothes, clean his own room, and cook simple meals using cheap ingredients. No more lavish feasts. He learned to eat cheap sandwiches and drink tap water instead of fine wine. And gradually, he realized he didn't need those luxuries anymore. He was no longer the arrogant heir of the Reynolds empire. He was becoming just another ordinary person, living off his own hard work. One day, Ethan received an order to deliver food to a high-end apartment complex. When he arrived, the customer, a wealthy middle-aged man, opened the door with an annoyed expression. "What the hell took you so long?" the man snapped. Ethan flinched, glancing at his watch. I was only 5 minutes late. 5 minutes? That's too long for me, the man barked before throwing a crumpled bill onto the floor. You're not even worth me handing it to you. Pick it up. Ethan froze. Humiliation burned through his chest. Once he had been the one throwing money at people. Now he was being treated like trash. He wanted to fight back, to scream, "Who the hell do you think you are?" But instead, he took a deep breath, bent down, picked up the money, and walked away without a word. For the first time, he understood that sometimes you have to swallow your pride just to survive. Not everything could be fought against. Not everything could be made fair. Sometimes life was unfair, but you had to keep going anyway. And Ethan was learning to keep going, no matter how hard it got. The one thing Ethan was grateful for was having Sophia by his side. Since the day he started working, Sophia had always been there to help him. She didn't just show him how to do deliveries, she also helped him adjust to his new life. When Ethan was wrongly blamed by a customer, she patted his shoulder and laughed. Welcome to the real world. No one treats you nicely just because you want them to. When Ethan felt exhausted from work, she encouraged him. You're doing better than before. Just hang in there a little longer. When Ethan doubted himself, she told him, you're not a failure, you're just starting over. With Sophia around, Ethan no longer felt so alone. He realized the world wasn't completely cruel, as long as someone truly cared about you. Gradually, Ethan was no longer the person he used to be. He was no longer the arrogant, spoiled heir who relied on his father's wealth. He was becoming a man who fought for his own survival. And for the first time in years, he felt proud of himself. After months of struggling, Ethan and Sophia had become closer than ever. They were no longer just co-workers. They were true friends, standing by each other through every hardship. One night, after finishing a long day of deliveries, they sat on the worn-out steps in front of their apartment, sharing a simple loaf of bread Ethan had bought with his meager wages. Sophia suddenly spoke up. Hey, Ethan, do you think we'll be doing this forever? Ethan hesitated. He had never really thought about the future before. But now, after everything he had been through, he wanted to do something that truly mattered. I don't know, but I want to build something of my own. Sophia smiled, determination gleaming in her eyes. Then why don't we open a pizza shop? Ethan blinked in surprise. Pizza? Yeah, I know how to cook, and you have a business mind. We understand what customers want, and most importantly, I believe we can do it. Ethan thought about it for a long moment. Before, he had never imagined starting something from nothing. But now, he realized it was time to build something meaningful. He nodded. All right, let's do it. They found a tiny kitchen space in a narrow alley. On that alley, cheap to rent but big enough to get started. They handled everything themselves. Ethan took care of purchasing ingredients, designing the menu, and managing costs. Sophia handled cooking, preparing the food, and making sure everything was perfect. Each pizza was made with dedication and effort. At first, they only had a few regular customers, but soon word spread. People didn't just come back because of the food, but because they could feel the heart put into each dish. Ethan also discovered his talent for business. Perhaps the blood of a businessman had always run in his veins. Over time, their small shop expanded, hired more staff, and became stable. From a tiny unknown shop, they turned it into a well-loved pizza place in the neighborhood. For the first time, Ethan felt like he had truly built something of his own. That day was special. Ethan and Sophia's little pizza shop had just achieved its highest sales ever. Everyone in the restaurant was busy when the door suddenly opened. A man stepped inside, tall, well-dressed in a black suit, with sharp, piercing eyes full of authority. Ethan froze in place. Standing in front of him was Alexander Reynolds, his father. No one else recognized him, but to Ethan, that moment felt like time had stopped. His father scanned the restaurant, his expression unreadable, before stepping up to the counter. One special pizza. His voice was calm and steady, just as it had always been. Ethan swallowed hard. He had so many questions, but didn't know where to start. His hands trembled slightly as he prepared the dish itself, his heart pounding louder than ever. When the pizza was placed in front of Alexander, Sure. The older man cut a slice, took a bite, and chewed slowly. No one spoke. Only the sound of silverware against the plate could be heard. After a moment, he put down his knife and looked straight into Ethan's eyes. Well done, son. Ethan felt his chest tighten. He had waited to hear those words for so long, but never expected them to come now, in this moment, in this place. Alexander sighed, his voice lowering. Everything that happened, From the company's bankruptcy, the frozen accounts, you losing everything, it was all planned by me. Ethan couldn't believe his ears. What? Alexander nodded, his expression calm. The company never went bankrupt. I was never arrested. It was all a plan to teach you the true value of life. Ethan's heart stopped for a second. All the suffering, the hunger, the humiliation was all a lesson his father had designed. His fists clenched. You did all this just to teach me a lesson? Alexander met his gaze. I knew you would hate me, but if I hadn't done it, you would never have learned to stand on your own feet. Ethan couldn't say anything. His emotions swirled into a storm, anger, confusion, pain. But after a moment, he understood. If his father hadn't done this, he would have never changed. He would have never learned the value of hard work, of money, of persistence. He would have never known what it meant to truly fight for something. Ethan took a deep breath, staring at his father for a long time. Finally, he smiled. You were right, Dad. Alexander nodded, a hint of pride in his eyes. So are you ready to come back? Ethan looked around the small pizza shop, then at Sophia. He shook his head, not out of rejection, but because he had a different idea. I'll come back, but not just to take over the company. Alexander raised an eyebrow. What do you mean? Ethan's eyes gleamed with newfound determination. I want to expand into the food and fast food industry. Why? Ethan smiled for the first time with real confidence. Because I've realized that there are so many people out there who need help. Sometimes just a simple meal can change their day. Sophia looked at Ethan, smiling proudly. Alexander was silent for a long moment, then slowly nodded. Then show me you can do it. Ethan grinned, excitement and passion burning in his heart. He was no longer the spoiled Ethan Reynolds of the past. He was someone new, and this was just the beginning of his real journey. In the following months, Ethan returned to the business world, but on his own terms. He used his father's resources not to build an empire of luxury, but to create a food chain that focused on providing affordable, quality meals to people in need. He and Sophia opened multiple small restaurants, hiring people who had once been like him, struggling, lost, looking for a second chance. And slowly, his brand became more than just a business. It became a movement. One night, as he stood on the balcony of his office overlooking the city, his father walked up beside him. I'm proud of you, Ethan. Ethan turned to his father, smiling. For the first time, Dad, I'm proud of myself too. They stood there in silence, father and son, not as a billionaire and his heir, but as two men who had finally understood each other. And as Ethan looked ahead, he realized this was just the beginning. A new journey, a new purpose. This time not for money, but for something greater.